Are you ready for the glorious restoration of England? Let's find out. Hello and welcome to the next episode of The English Way. Today we have a little bit of an unusual treat for you, and it's a poem, but it's not just a poem, it has been dubbed somewhat of a prophecy. The poem was written by a gentleman called DW Nash in what appears to be the winter of 1870-1871 against the backdrop of some incredibly impressive victories by the Prussians against the French. Now, this gentleman's obviously sat down and wondered what would become of England if we began to lose our virtues with such virile opponents on the continent. He specifically mentions the Muscovites and the Germans. Interestingly enough, the decline that he describes is pretty much what happened to England in the 20th century. What makes it remarkable is that what happened to England in the 20th century, as it did many countries in the world, is the effect of Marxism and its various offspring on those countries. He wouldn't have known that this was to happen. But what he lays out is exactly what has happened. And what's very interesting is that he also has such faith and conviction within the spirit of the English that he lays out the inevitable rise of England again. And what caught my attention when I first read this poem is not only did it describe what has happened under the influence of Marxism on the world writ large in the last 100 years, but also that England would rise from its knees where it currently is. And I think that is testament to the gentleman understanding the virtues of the English, which I will go on to discuss in future episodes. The first time I read it, I came across it on a website that was collating prophecies of various kinds, and some of them had come true and some of them hadn't. But I'd never read this one before, and I was familiar with a lot of prophecies, whether they were Eastern or Western, and this one was pretty new to me. And I don't know if it's a prophecy as such, or whether this gentleman just had excellent foresight and forethought. But it's a rather engaging poem, and the way it lays out and the way it begins, it lays out what is great about England and the English countryside. Anybody familiar with Tolkien will recognise the scenery that is painted at the beginning of this poem. And then it goes on to describe the destruction of those things and what happens if we lose faith and we lose the firmness and the belief and the love of our country. But then it does go on in its later chapters to talk about the rise of England when the goodness shall be restored. The poem finds us in an odd position where we have lost our confidence in our culture, and I think we forget that we are one of the greatest cultures that has ever existed. There is a very short list of cultures that have shaped the world in such a way that the English has, and we're quite lucky to be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with the Romans and the Greeks, the Zoroastrians, the Persians, the ancient Chinese. There are very, very few of us on that list, but the English are definitely on that list. And we find ourselves at a bit of a crossroads. We feel, whilst we want to defend and reinvigorate the culture, we feel suffocated by the establishment, suffocated by the mechanisms that have been put in place purposefully to derail the culture. Marx understood that actually national culture was what really stood in the way of global communism, which is why there is such an attack on all national cultures. It's not just ours. But again, I can only speak for the English because I am English. But it is a predicament that most countries in the world are finding themselves in. And I think this poem, if anything, gives heart. It gives heart and understanding to the Britishness that lies within our nation, and the English specifically that I can relate to. And I think at this particular junction in history, we need that. We need to regain our cultures. We need to hold on to them tightly. This is how we get through this dark night that we're in. Because we are quite an incredible people. We're a very tolerant people, and I think people mistake our tolerance for weakness, and I think that's an incredibly foolish thing that they've done. The English aren't weak, we just don't like war. But when we go to war, we tend to do it properly. But once we do that, it changes everything. So we'll do anything to appease, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. It's generally the path of wisdom. But we are finding ourselves at a point where appeasement is running out of options. And there are a lot of people who are running out of faith and spirit. And I really wanted to put this poem out there so that they could take a bit more. They could really galvanize themselves a little bit more and have some faith in what lies ahead. Because I do think, as the pendulum swings both ways, I do think the glorious restoration of England, as I call it, has nothing to do with any past tense terms. I do think it is an inevitability. I think the culture will be reborn and re-strengthened, and I think this is essentially how we navigate ourselves out of the mess that we're in, is to lean into our individual national cultures. So yes, without further ado, let's crack on. This is The Fox's Prophecy by DW Nash. Tom Hill was in the saddle one bright November morn. The echoing glades of Geating Wood were ringing with his horn. The varied tints of autumn still lingered in the wood, and on the leaves the morning sun poured out a golden flood. Soft fleecy clouds were sailing across the vault of blue, a fairer hunting morning no huntsman ever knew. All nature seemed rejoicing that glorious morn to see, all seemed to breathe a fresher life, beast, insect, bird, and tree. But sound and sight of beauty fell dull on eye and ear. The huntsman's heart was heavy, his brow oppressed with care. High in the stirrups raised he stood, and long he gazed around, and breathlessly and anxiously he listened for a sound. No voice of hound, no sound of horn, the woods around were mute, as though the earth had swallowed up his comrades man and brute. He thought, I must essay to find my hounds at any cost. A huntsman who has lost his hounds is but a huntsman lost. Then round he turned his horse's head, and shook his bridle free, when he was struck by an aged fox that sat beneath a tree. He raised his eyes in glad surprise, that huntsman keen and bold, but there was in that fox's look that made his blood run cold. He raised his hand to touch his horn and shout a tally-ho, but mastered by that fox's eye, his lips refused to blow. For he was grim and gaunt of limb, with aged all silver o'er. He might have been an Arctic fox escaped from Greenland's shore. But age his vigour had not tamed, nor dimmed his sparkling eye, which shone with an unearthly fire, a fire could never die. And thus the huntsman he addressed, in tones distinct and clear, who heard as they who in a dream the fairies' music hear. Huntsman, he said, a sudden thrill through all the listener ran, to hear a creature of the wood speak like a Christian man. Last of my race, to me 'tis given the future to unfold, to speak the words which never yet spake fox of mortal mould. Then print my words upon your heart, and stamp them on your brain, that you and others may impart my prophecy again. Strong life is yours in manhood's prime, your cheek with heat is red. Time has not laid a finger yet in earnest on your head. But ere your limbs are bent with age, and ere your locks are grey, the sport that you have loved so well shall long have passed away. Yet think not, huntsman, I rejoice to see the end so near, nor think the sound of horn and hound to me a sound of fear. In my strong youth, which numbers now full many a winter back, how scornfully I shook my brush before the Berkeley pack. Then think not that I speak in fear, or prophesy in hate. Too well I know the doom reserved for all my tribe by fate. Too well I know by wisdom taught the existence of my race. O'er all wide England's green domain is bound up with the chase. Better in early youth and strength the race for life to run, than poisoned like a noxious rat, or slain by felon gun. For not upon these hills alone the doom of sport shall fall. O'er the broad face of England creeps the shadow of the wall. The years roll on, old manners change, old customs lost their sway. The manly blood of England into weaker veins shall run. The Fursey Down, the moorland heath, the steam plough shall invade. Nor park nor manor shall escape, common, not forest glade. Degenerate sons of manlier sires to lower joys shall fall. The faithless law of Germany, the gilded voice of Gaul. The sports of their forefathers to baser tastes shall yield. The vices of the town displace the pleasures of the field. For swiftly o'er the level shore the waves of progress ride. The ancient landmarks, one by one, shall sink beneath the tide. Time-honoured creeds and ancient faith, the altar and the crown, lordship's hereditary right before that tide go down. Base churls shall mock the mighty names writ on the roll of time. Religion shall be held a jest, and loyalty a crime. No word of prayer, no hymn of praise sound in the village school. The people's education utilitarians rule. The peasants to their daily tasks in surly silence fall. No kindly hospitalities in farmhouse or in hall. No harvest feast, nor Christmas tide shall farm or manor hold. Science alone can give plenty, the only God is gold. The homes where love and peace should dwell, fierce politics shall vex, and unsexed woman strive to prove herself the coarser sex. Mechanics in their workshops affairs of state decide. Honour and truth, old-fashioned words, the noisy mob deride. The statesmen that should rule the realm coarse demagogues displace. The glory of 1,000 years shall end in foul disgrace. The honour of old England cotton shall buy and sell, and hardware manufacturers cry, peace, lo, all is well. Trade shall be held the only God, and gain the sole device. The statesman's aim shall be peace, and peace at any price. Her army and her navy Britain shall cast aside. Soldiers and ships are costly things, defence and empty pride. The Germans and the Muscovites shall rule the narrow seas. Old England's flag shall cease to float in triumph in the breeze. Taught wisdom by disaster, England shall learn to know that trade is not the only gain heaven gives to man below. The greed for gold departed, the golden calf cast down, old England's sun again shall rise, the altar and the crown. Rejoicing seas shall welcome their mistress once again. Again in hall and homestead shall joy and peace be seen, and smiling children raise again the maypole on the green. Again the hospitable board shall groan with Christmas cheer, and mutual service bond again the peasant and the peer. Again the smiling hedgerow shall field from field divide, again among the woodlands the scarlet troop shall ride. Again it seemed that aged fox more prophecies would say, when sudden came upon the wind, hark, Farad, gone away. The listener started from his trance, he sat there all alone. That well-known cry had burst the spell, the aged fox was gone. The huntsman turned, he spurred his steed, and to the cry he sped, and when he thought upon that fox, said naught but shook his head. So there you have it, The Fox's Prophecy by DW Nash. It's quite a spirited piece, really. Excellently written. It lays out, if anyone knows England well, that is England in a nutshell. But yes, it's full of hope. And I think that's what we need right now. You know, it's the one thing that was stuck into Pandora's box secretly was hope. And it's what gets us through. And as dark as things seem, hope is essentially the light of the gods. And it's something that we must hang on to, because it won't turn out to be as bad as we think. It'll be difficult. Don't get me wrong. I think the future, there will always be tribulations, and we have to get ourselves back out of the mess that we have created, and that won't be easy. It's like cutting out a cancer. It will be hard. But we have to have hope, and we cannot let our spirits fall too low. England will be restored. The glorious restoration of England is nigh. The pendulum shall swing, and we shall reclaim not only our customs and our cultures, but also our virtues. But it has to come from each of us. It has to come from in here, inside each man. We create the environment that we inhabit. It is the kingdom within. You create the kingdom within to manifest to the kingdom without. So each of us has to really sit down and think, well, why? Why am I here at this point? What can I bring? What can I do? And I think as long as we're on that track, everything's going to be okay. So if you like this sort of content and you want to find out more, in the next episode I will talk a bit more about the spiritual impulse of the English. Please click like and subscribe and hit the notification bell, and I shall see you on the next one.